So it looks like we can probably go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining, everyone. We're really excited to have you here for our conversation with Mary Beth about dual career couples. I am Luke. I am part of the Manbassadors sub club of the Women in Leadership Club at Haas. And we partnered with the Center for Equity, Gender, and Leadership, or EGAL, to host this event. We also want to thank the Partners Club and Cub Club for helping with the event. And the goal of this conversation is to continue progressing gender equity by giving you ideas and tools to implement at home and at work. And with that, I'll pass it over to Genevieve to talk more about EGAL and their playbook that you can take with you after this event.
Great. Thanks, Luke. And hi, everyone. Wonderful to be with you today. So my name is Genevieve Smith. I'm the Associate Director at the Center for Equity, Gender, and Leadership here at Haas. And we're really excited to be hosting this event with Manbassadors and great to have Mary Beth here. Before jumping into our fantastic fireside chat, I want to just share some quick background on the topic. This built from some work that EGAL has done around dual career couples, and we actually developed a playbook for business leaders on the topic that we released last January. Just being part of a dual career couple myself, the last couple of months have been challenging and rewarding in a lot of different ways. Just as a tidbit, space is obviously at a premium here in the Bay, and my husband and I live in about a 400 square foot, 1-bedroom apartment. So navigating who gets to take a call from our makeshift office where our desks are, aka the corner of our bedroom, is always a morning topic. And only once or twice have we attempted to make calls next to each other, kind of doing a stare down while seeing who was going to, increasing volume while seeing who was going to be the first one to break and go into the other room. So we've definitely had some hard times where lines between work and life have been crossed and blurred. And we've also had some good times where we've been able to grow and have new experiences and learn new things about each other. So it's been and definitely continues to be a journey. And our situation is unique and far from the challenges that dual career couples with children have, or those who live in multi-generational households. So just real quick, I wanted to share a bit of background. Dual career couples, face a lot of different challenges, and generally individuals in dual career couples have increased challenges and time constraints from juggling work and life. And the weight tends to fall on women in heterosexual couples as gender norms and expectations are still largely on them for unpaid care activities and prioritizing their partner's career. And oftentimes what this can look like is a woman taking longer time off or stepping back from her career when having kids. Of course, then came COVID, and some of these stats might not be new to you, but women's unemployment hit highs in April, it's about 16%, and disproportionate impacts for women of color in particular. And since then, challenges have obviously continued. As many as 2 million women are currently considering leaving the workforce in the US, and that's not necessarily by choice. And this is especially mothers, and even more mothers with young children. Mothers that are part of dual career couples are twice as likely as fathers in dual career couples to spend 5 or more hours a day on chores. And 1 in 3 mothers are considering leaving the workforce or downshifting their careers because of COVID. And Black women in particular are less likely to feel supported during COVID. So, this essentially is meaning that the progress that we've made over the last 6 years for women in the workplace and advancing in leadership is potentially being erased. Companies are stepping up, but really not addressing the underlying causes for burnout and stress. This is just a quick visual from McKinsey. It kind of really hits home some of these challenges. You can see here the mothers in particular, or mothers are feeling kind of pressure to work more, burned out and exhausted at higher levels than fathers. And the breakdown is really acute when you look at senior level women, and then higher, again, disproportionate impacts for Black women. So just kind of wanting to call out some of that. And if you're interested in more about this, McKinsey put out a great report recently. These are just some actions to jot down for equity fluent leaders. And again, you can find out more at our playbooks, which is linked at the bottom of the slide here. But really around, how can we support workers to create work-life boundaries and allow for flexibility? Encouraging managers to have these conversations with their supervisees is important as well. And extending childcare benefits and leave options for employees. This includes expanded leave for caretaking, but also providing parents with care options at home and subsidies. And emphasizing the importance of work-life balance to employees is really important in this time. One aspect here is providing resources and education to managers for effective and empathetic management, and also unconscious biases in these times. Managers can actually be a really big roadblock to having great policies, but those not being put in place effectively. ERGs can also support employees, and then taking an equity lens in who's getting laid off and who's getting brought back is important. And moving forward, I just really want to reiterate that we don't want to return back to the old normal that wasn't working for so many. So continuing options like working remote, and also providing caretaking support for employees indefinitely. I really can't stress the importance of supporting caretaking. So check out our playbooks for more information. And if you are in a dual career couple, this is an activity I would recommend. Feel free to screenshot it if you would like. It's one I did with my partner recently on a long drive and really opened my eyes to priorities I didn't know he had and new ways that I could support him and him me. This is part of so it's an activity, kind of a conversation you can do with your partner. And it's from a crisis deal approach, which is from a professor, Jennifer Petriglieri, who's a professor at INSEAD. So feel free to screenshot that and take this home to do with your partner. And with that, let me turn it back to Luke and Ben.
Ben, we can't hear you right now.
Worst case scenario, I try and call in sometimes when this happens. Mm-mm.
Well, I'm happy to maybe do some introductions, and unless Ben, would you like to jump back in for or Luke, would you like to jump back in for the intros?
Yeah, I can do that. So we're really excited to introduce both Jody and Mary Beth. Jody is a EW MBA student here. And a quick background on her. She's at Haas and she works during the day, she works as a senior product manager at the Men's Warehouse and Joseph A. Bank, where when she's not in our class. She previously worked as customer success manager at MoveWeb, a San Francisco-based software company. She is the current VP of intersectionality for women in leadership at Haas, in a dual career couple herself. Although her husband jokes that he hopes to cash in and become a stay-at-home dad someday. And Mary Beth joins us. She's a mom of two and an advocate for creating inclusive workplaces for parents. She is the founder and CEO of Work 360, a platform designed to create workplace cultures that care through scalable leadership development programs that promote flexible work, empathetic leadership, and breaking down the parental bias. As a former senior vice president in the finance industry, she always valued growing her career. And like so many other career-driven mamas, she was surprised to hit the maternal wall. Her own experience propelled her to dive deeper into maternal bias, to influence changes in the workplace culture, and to advocate for national paid leave policies. Her work has been featured in Forbes, Today, CNBC, Working Mother, Fairy Godboss, Scary Mommy, and more. So with that, I will turn it over to Jody and Mary Beth, and we're really excited to hear from both of you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Luke.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you so much, Mary Beth, for joining us here today. Super excited to chat with you.
Yeah, me too. I'm thrilled to be here.
Thank you. I guess jumping to the here and now, as Genevieve shared also, with that recent McKinsey analysis finding that the COVID-19 crisis could set women back half a decade, they highlighted that as many as 2 million women are considering leaving the workforce, and this would be disproportionately impacting women of color. Just to level set, could you share with us why you think this is happening?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think all of the statistics that Genevieve shared are spot on. And I would encourage everyone to read that McKinsey report and to also look at the playbook. And I think we can pop that into the chat to ensure that everyone has that access. But yeah, I think there's a few things, right? Like, obviously, we didn't expect this pandemic. And so it's really highlighted systems that have already been broken. We don't have an infrastructure of care in this country. It has always been challenging for working parents in particular to navigate days off, school closures. Summer is already a huge challenge, right? And so we just really inflated this situation through the pandemic with just widespread care disruptions, both in school and childcare. And then I think, when we look at kind of the disproportionate impact to Black women in particular, we really have to look at, communities of color have been disproportionately impacted by this crisis. So losing jobs, furloughed, but also from a public health perspective too. They have less access to care, are actually higher rates of even getting the virus, right? So like all of these things are contributing to us losing ground. We've made progress over the last few decades, and I think we really are seeing kind of this historic breakdown, and women are leaving the workforce. The numbers that came out in September showed, that over 800,000 women had been pushed out of the workforce because of responsibilities with caretaking, and not that they really were choosing to leave. It's just that we've been put in a really difficult position.
Yeah, and as the lines between like going to work and being at home are blurring, can you advise business leaders to implement strategies that would support couples during COVID?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, I love the playbook from EGAL. I think it really touches on things that, even though it was released prior to COVID, it actually really hits on the things that we are doing with companies today. When we think about policies and procedures and flexibility and leadership, it's really about moving forward to supporting the whole employee. And that means recognizing that they are, more likely to be part of a dual career couple, that, the majority of women and men are going to become caretakers at some point. I think it's also recognizing, what is the definition of care in the sense that it's not just having a new baby, it's also, caring for your family, caring for yourself. And so really recognizing that we need to think about how we can move cultures forward that truly care about their employees and are set up in a way that benefits kind of the modern employee today. And so things like flexibility, but when we think about flexibility at Work 360, we call it, 360 flexibility. So it's not that you're creating a policy for, new moms to be able to work remotely for a period of time. Now, if that's all you're going to do it. Like, absolutely, I want you to still do that. But what we really want to do is to create a culture where everyone has that flexibility to work remotely if that's what works for them, to make it, more fluid or a hybrid model where, you're not siloing a certain portion of your workforce and creating almost a double-edged sword policy that's going to actually limit their career growth. But if most employees have this flexibility to kind of work in a way that works for them, and then you're leveling the playing field a little bit better. So, for those of us who have caregiving responsibilities, we're able to focus on that. For those that don't, they're also able to care for themselves, care for, family members, take that class, get their MBA, right? Like whatever it is. So I think it's really important that we think about how we can kind of adapt cultures and policies to be inclusive of everyone.
I love that. I love how that extends beyond just like being a parent and potentially, being a new parent. I can think of a couple of classmates who are definitely in that stage right now, or going to become new parents in the next semester.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a tough place to be in, especially now with COVID. And I think, at the end of the day, it's really about building empathetic leaders and having managers that know how to have these tough conversations and are able to work with their employees in a partnership to figure out, what's going to benefit the employee, but also what's going to work for the company. We have to keep in mind that most of these companies are here to produce a product or a service and ultimately want to thrive, and so we can't ignore that, but we can look for ways where it can be mutually beneficial.
Do you have any predictions on the future of remote work and how workplaces might build in that flexibility?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. I mean, I think initially in the first few months, it was just like a power through mentality. And, we're going to kind of deal with these shutdowns, but then we're going to quickly get, back to normal. Now we're 8+ months in, and normalcy, I don't think that there ever, was a normal really to go back to. And so, what we're seeing in some of the data is that employees by and large want flexibility. This isn't anything new. However, millennials in particular and Gen Z really value flexibility in the workplace. And already, numbers north of 60% of employees said that they would have stayed in a position if it had just offered more flexibility. 50% of new millennial mothers actually changed their jobs because they're looking for more flexibility, or they're looking to change job status to enable them to really, support their life as a caretaker and as a mother. So these were already things that were happening. I think the silver lining of the pandemic is that we've proven that remote work works, right? That we can be productive. And it's not all positions by and large, obviously, but I think there is a significant portion of organizations that are recognizing that it can be just as productive, if not even more productive. So I think the biggest thing that we're going to see is a shift towards more of a hybrid model, which is the most challenging to execute, of course, because you have to do remote work really well, and you have to set up your workforce and your employees to have remote first tools. But at the same time, there's still going to be opportunities for collaborative environments, dynamic workplaces. People do want to have that social interaction for sure. So, what that looks like in each company is going to be a little bit different. I think the companies that are setting themselves up well truly are just being transparent in their decisions, transparent in what they expect kind of moving forward. One of the things that we've heard time and time again from employees is like, I'm still working on a folding table in my kitchen, and I just don't know if should I invest in a desk? Is this long term, right? And so it can be even that simple of, communicating with your employees on what your expectations are. And if you are an organization that is going to return to a mostly in-person environment, it's going to be really important to provide additional support, particularly for parents, and particularly if we don't see a return to care in the numbers are between 25% and 50% of care centers may never reopen. Where schools are still very much closed, hybrid, remote, right? And even if companies are opening, I think there's going to be a big gap between when parents are in a position to be able to leverage care in previous ways. So I think we're just seeing a lot of shifts there. And so I think for those companies that are returning to the office, they're going to need to find some flexibility to work with their parents, or really risk losing a significant portion of talent, which I think we're already seeing female, particularly senior female talent leaving because of the inflexibility of some of their workplaces.
Speaking more about that in terms of the wage gaps as well as caretaker gaps, how should we address those when we're planning for our careers as well as our personal goals in the context of family? And yeah,
right. It's so hard. I remember I was sitting in undergrad in a women in business class, being I'm gonna be in the C-suite one day and rise the ranks, and everyone, and I'm an old millennial, so this was gosh, now 15 years ago. But, you know, I think it was this idea, you know, that we can do anything and we can do everything. And at least that was, you know, my perspective, I think, growing up and in the beginning of my career. What I think is really important is for us to have these conversations and to talk about it, because when you really look at the wage gap, the significant portion of the wage gap is really a caregiving gap. And when we see that the window of men and women starting to separate, it's right around the time that you start a family. You know, there was a Times article I think it was a couple of years ago, that basically said the worst time to have a baby for your career is between the ages of 25 and 35. So, you know, like when you have a baby, basically. So, you know, yeah, and it's because, you know, if you have children really early, you're able to kind of like build back your career very quickly and then kind of move up the trajectory. Or if you wait until you're older, you oftentimes are in a more senior level role where you can advocate for that flexibility and you're more likely to get it, right? So, you know, I think what's really important in terms of what we can control and do is to understand that, you know, it's really about your home setup and your work setup, right? Career and family are definitely blended together. You know, we work with clients on creating career and family strategies together. You know, what Genevieve shares, those kind of questions about, you know, what you can reflect on with your partner, I think are so critical in kind of looking at how are you moving forward with both of your careers. And Jennifer, who gave her those questions, you know, actually wrote a book on and talked a lot about, you know, is it that you're both going up the trajectory at the same time? Is it one then the other? Are you kind of spiraling? You know, how are you figuring out whose career is kind of taking lead? Or if both people's careers are super important right now, then how do you get the support that you need? And so I think it's about having really honest and open conversations at home. You know, I think it is that men need to step up more in terms of care and housework. We've seen great strides, and for the men here today, I applaud you for the strides you've already made, and I think generationally, you know, are definitely contributing the most historically. But you know, when we look at like, I think there was something like 50% of men said that they're helping with online learning, and only 3% of moms agreed. Right. So it was like, okay, so you think you're doing more, but you're not quite there. And so I think it's really about kind of finding ways to support each other in your relationships and really determine how you both, if in a dual career couple, want to tackle your careers and also want to kind of tackle and handle your family obligations. And I do also think then from the work perspective, it's about really looking at how are you advocating for yourself in terms of what you need to continue in your career? How do you start to look at organizations and companies that you know support families, support people having a life outside of work a little bit? You know, it's like we can look at policies too. So you'll look at like maternity leave versus paternity leave, or even companies that still continue to promote primary care versus secondary care. So, you know, what is a secondary caregiver anyway? I think both parents are really probably considered primary caregivers most of the time. And so I think you want to be looking at like those companies that are looking at parental leave as opposed to really separating the two, because when we separate the two, we are really promoting in that workplace that the caregiver should be the birthing mother. And so it's something, you know, when you really look at that policy, how is that infiltrating into the rest of the culture? Whereas if you have an organization that really is saying, yes, we promote all of, you know, our parents to have access to caregiving leave or to parental leave at the birth of a new child, you know, that really shows that they have a more inclusive policy and that they, you know, are promoting care for both genders.
Oh, yeah, that's awesome. That's a nugget I'm going to take away in terms of looking at policy and relaying it back to like, what does the company really stand for?
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. And I think one of the things that's really interesting about, what does the company stand for? And especially for all of you kind of looking for new jobs coming up here, it's a good opportunity to ask them, what did they do to support their employees during COVID? What were the steps that they took in terms of, managing stress and burnout and mental health? And also, how are they supporting working parents through this crisis? So it's a really interesting opportunity, I think, as someone looking for a job and being the interviewee, to really have a point in time when it's completely acceptable to be asking those questions and to be wondering about how that company treated their employees through this.
That's a great point. I was going to say, hypothetically, if I was looking, what might I ask in an informational interview, or like when I'm trying to understand more through a coffee chat? And it sounds like it's the perfect time to be asking those questions and relaying it back to the current crisis that we're in.
Exactly. And I think also look at leadership, right? Like look at, what is the makeup of their leaders, but also what are they doing? If you look at a company and it's still all white men at the top, then asking, what are your steps and strategies to address that? How are you continuing to look at a talent strategy from recruitment through career growth? How important is diversity, equity, and inclusion to your organization? And not only do you have a program, but do you measure it? Do you incentivize leaders around, promoting minorities and women in the workplace? And I think, asking those tough questions, it's challenging, but I think it really tells you a lot more about the organization, and if they're truly committed and have, this an authentic belief in it, or if it is just a marketing ploy.
Yeah, definitely. And it sounds like the perfect time to be asking before we join the company, for sure.
Exactly, right? Because you want to know, and I think the more honest and open that you can be in an interview and be asking about, the culture and more about the organization, and even simple things like, what keeps you here outside of the work? What are the things that you enjoy about this organization that don't have to do with your day-to-day job? Because that's when you start to learn a little bit more about just how it feels to be there. And, look, we spend a lot of time at work, especially in the US, right? So it's important to make sure that you feel good about the work that you're moving into and the organization that you're joining. And ultimately, if you ask those questions and they think that you're being inappropriate, or they don't think it's professional enough, like that tells you a lot right there, right, about that organization. Yeah. And so, I think it's looking at your own priorities and what do you want out of an opportunity and what do you want out of an organization, and ensuring that you're asking questions that align with those personal priorities.
That makes sense. Do you feel that it's one of those questions that we ask after we have an offer, or kind of anytime?
Yeah, that's such a tricky question. No, it's a good one though. I think, look, I think get through the first round always, right? Like, make sure that you've kind of proven yourself for sure. And then I think you have to kind of feel out the interviewer and kind of how open and honest they can be. Yeah. But I think, if it is a more formal process and you don't feel like it's an open dialogue or an opportunity to share, then if you do have an offer in hand, I would always ask, like, can I meet with someone who's in a similar position as me? Can I do like a little bit of shadowing so that I have, can have more of just that personal time to get to know the organization and get to know the culture. And again, like if they're hesitant to do that, big red flag, right? Yeah. So, I think if you don't feel comfortable in the interview process, I never want to say you should absolutely do that, because I think you have to follow your gut. But when you do have an offer in hand, you absolutely should be asking about their policies, about kind of, their commitments to DE&I, their commitments to, corporate social responsibility. They're also big selling points for organizations too, so I think they should be very used to speaking to them. Yeah. But then to have the opportunity to connect with someone who's kind of on the ground in a similar level role to what you're in is important.
Thanks for getting into that with me. I know that was a little off script, but I just wanted
it's all
to
good.
get rid of it.
Yeah.
Jumping back here, there are some questions here about the pitfalls being when companies try to make progress on gender equity. Oftentimes there's a challenge with managers maybe not knowing or understanding policies that are in place to support dual career couples, or maybe inadvertently expressing bias against someone who takes advantage of these policies, like if potentially penalizing someone in performance reviews if they took more advantage of that flexibility, and potentially even seeing men penalized or being criticized by managers for taking their full parental leave. So how can companies train and provide managers with tools to assist employees to become more effective leaders?
Yeah, so this is a big gap. It's actually something that's really our sweet spot, and where our company focuses is actually on supporting the manager. Because, we have been working with parents for years now. And the thing that came up time and time again was, it matters in terms of the benefits and the support that you provide me. But if my manager is not flexible and empathetic, it's really difficult. No, even if I have the best backup care benefit, it's not going to matter if my manager doesn't understand, like when I have to, care for a sick child or something like that. So how we really address this is a few things. I mean, I think number one, it is communication. What we have found is that a lot of times the breakdown is actually between leadership and that management level. So, people leaders, particularly junior people leaders, are not always getting the training that they need and the direction. So for example, we're working with an organization that just put out a new flexibility policy. And when we dug a little bit deeper, only about 30 to 40% of employees had even really seen it. And managers had seen it, but they didn't know how to implement it. They didn't know what it actually meant in terms of what they could offer, right? Like, does it mean that I can let my employee work remotely from anywhere in the world? Or does it mean that I can just let them work remotely in a 5-mile radius, right? So I think sometimes it's not that the intention isn't there. It's just that they haven't fully executed the details in a way that are really digestible for those people leaders to be able to actually, execute on. And, in the example you brought up around parental leave, I think is a really good one. We've seen a lot of organizations, particularly top tech firms and top tech financial firms, that have moved to equal parental leave, right? And great in policy, but I even had a colleague of mine, call me up one day, and he was like, so my wife's pregnant again, and we now have equal leave. I'm really excited about it. But, I asked HR, like, what should I take? And the HR leader said, well, just take what you need. And he was like, what does that even mean, take what you need, right? Like, now I feel like I'm in this really tough position where if I take all of it, they're going to think that I have something weird going on because I didn't have that much access to leave the last time I had a kid. So it was like a really challenging, position that he felt he was put in, where something as simple as that HR leader saying, you should take all of it because that's what we're providing to you, right? We expect you to take all of your leave. And I think sometimes when we start these policies, we do need to incentivize. We can actually take a little bit of learning from other countries that have really incentivized men to take their leave, where if they take it, then the whole family gains more access to leave. And so some of this is cultural for sure, and we need to be also fighting it from like the national policy perspective and more in the government. But within organizations, I think it's great to have this new inclusive policy, but then how are you actually training managers about why it's important, about the shifting demographics, right? We know that only I think, and Genevieve would know this better because I think I actually got it from her playbook, but I think it's only 47% of baby boomers are part of dual career couples, whereas 78% of millennials are. And, 89% of professional women are part of dual career couples. So, men want to have the opportunity to take leave as well and to be a part of their family in a different way than generations had previously. So I think it is about educating leaders, letting them really understand what parental bias even is, what the maternal wall is, and so being able to have those conversations and those aha moments with those leaders then leads them to be, better supports for their employees kind of in these integral moments in their life.
Oh, yeah. I think everything you just said is resonating in that we have to have those conversations, and it sounds like the playbook is also a really good point for us to go back and look into. Do you have any other recommendations for students who may be current managers right now or will become managers, and in terms of advice that they could take and implement the next day?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, the biggest thing is for all of us to model, right? If we model what we want, and especially if you are walking into a role where you are leading a team, if you have oversight or influence to those people, it's important. It's important, number one, that we think about burnout and stress, that if you're emailing your employees at 11 o'clock at night, they feel like you're expecting them to respond, right? So, if it's an emergency or truly is urgent, great, that's fine. Make sure that you're communicating that. Otherwise, there's a really great feature in email called send delay. And so you can, if you personally need to be doing work at 11 o'clock, because that's what works for you, that's great, but make sure that you're putting it in a way that it's not, kind of forcing your team to also feel like this pressure and this response. And so I think some of it is really around communicating schedules and boundaries and setting expectations with your teams. And then I think in terms of the modeling perspective too, is, recognizing that if you share about your personal life, people are going to be a little bit more open to doing the same. If you, as a leader, especially as a male leader, say, oh, I have to take off to take my kid to a doctor's appointment, that normalizes it for everyone. There's this really, especially when it comes to caregiving, we talk about secret parenting in the workplace. I know, even when I was first having my daughter, which was only 5 years ago, it was already told to me by senior women to just not really talk about it, to just, block your calendar, don't talk about it, walk out the door, whatever you need to do, but we just don't talk about it. And I think one of the things that is important and is, and also, again, another little bit of a silver lining from the pandemic is, like, quite frankly, kids have been in the background, and dogs and everything else, right? And so I think there's this understanding that life is happening, while we're working all the time. And so the more that we can continue to parent out loud and share our life out loud in a way that makes it normal for our teams, I think can really shift the perspective and the culture within organizations, even just starting with your own team.
That's a great takeaway. Thanks. In terms of modeling and kind of mimicking the behaviors that we would expect back from our teammates. Yeah.
And one other thing I'll add to that, because I didn't say it, is like, take time off as a leader, right? If you're a manager, like, if you don't take any time off, your team won't feel like they can take time off. So if you don't shut down, they can't shut down. So again, it's that modeling.
That's fair. That's great. I think those are all of the questions that we have planned, and we can jump into Q&A from the audience.
Great.
Awesome. I'm jumping into the Q&A here. We have a question from Cordell. Sorry if I butchered your name. What percentage of men do stay home and stay with the children?
So it's a little bit higher right now. I don't have exact statistics in front of me. I think we've seen that, from women's perspective, about 20 to 25% of women completely opt out of the workforce. And then it jumps to about 40, a little bit north of 40% that, kind of take a step back or shift their schedule or are part-time in order to kind of handle caretaking responsibilities. We have seen an uptick in men, staying home, definitely in the last decade, but then also with the pandemic. So it is happening, but I'm going to guess it's still 10% or less. But, we can definitely find those statistics for you. It's I think that's one thing that's really important, is that we want to be talking about support for all parents, but we also need to recognize that it's still women that are disproportionately affected in the terms of kind of the impacts in the workplace and the impacts at home.
Yeah, fine, far.
Yeah. Oh, and it's where to find sources. In those percentages, the Bureau of Labor and Statistics is actually a great place for some of these statistics to be able to find, how many people are working parents, what's the proportion of dads, moms in the workplace, things like that. So that would be where I would go.
Perfect. Another question here from Stephanie. Mary Beth, what are your thoughts about advocacy for all workers at the state and federal level in terms of wages, childcare, caregiver requirements, parental leave, vacation time, etc.? Feels like to me this is a large container of all businesses, a large container that all businesses are in, and that work at this level is critical for all of us.
I absolutely 100% agree. I think, look, there's a lot of organizations out there that are trying to work and tackle this. One of my favorite organizations is Paid Leave US or Plus. They are tackling paid leave, paid family and medical leave. So basically FMLA, but at the, can you guys hear me? I think I just went frozen.
Yeah, still can.
Oh, there. Okay,
Nice.
Good. So, I think it's an infrastructure problem, right? Like there is no consistent care or time off in our country. And when you look at other countries, there's a great book by Caitlin Conley, Making Motherhood Work. And it really looks at policies in the US versus Germany versus Sweden versus Italy. And the thing that was really interesting about it is that women in the US blame themselves for the challenges that they feel between work and family, whereas most other women, number one, have better access to paid leave and better access to care support. But they blame the government when they feel like they're not getting it, because they recognize that it should be, kind of this social infrastructure to our workplace. I think there's opportunity with the new administration for some of this to shift. It will be very dependent on what lands with the Senate in terms of how progressive some of those policies are. However, I think, a lot of organizations that are working in this space, particularly in the policy and advocacy world, are trying to get investors, boards, and company leadership to really start to kind of put their weight behind it, because it is really challenging when it's all on the employer. And if there was some shared responsibility between the government and the employer, I think we would be in a lot better position. It would also allow for a lot more access for portability. One of the things that I think is really challenging is you join this great organization that has all these awesome benefits, and then you feel like you can't go do something else, or you can't move to another organization because they don't have that same that same support. And I think that actually limits innovation. It limits, career trajectories, particularly for women. So I think there's a lot of implications to it. And right now, organizations are looking at parental leave as a benefit, as a retention strategy, as opposed to something that should just be about supporting families and supporting, our workers to be healthy.
Wow, yeah. I never thought of it from a government versus company perspective, where having those policies might make it a more even playing field for people who are interested in joining other companies. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think, and right now, we also know that only about 20% of workers have access to paid family leave, and that 20% tend to be the least ones that need it, in terms of they are the ones that are, more socially and economically stable. They tend to be white collar workers, right? Whereas, the people that need it most are the ones that just don't even have the access to it.
That's a good point.
Question came in through the chat that I don't believe was in the Q&A, but it's from Heather. And it says, do you know of any companies that are public with their statistics of how much family leave their men versus women use? That seems like a great indicator of the culture.
Absolutely a great indicator. I think there's a lot promoted in terms of what's offered. what's not as publicly, like as easily able to find is, what percentage are actually taking it. And I think, to be honest, a lot of companies have made shifts in the last 5 years, right? So, it's very new. Parental leave in particular, to have equal parental leave, is very new still here in the US. Having paternity leave at all is still relatively new for organizations, at least more than 2 weeks. So, I think in terms of how are people actually taking it, that's a great question to be asking in an interview, right? So if they have this on their website under their benefits on their career page and are really promoting it, then asking, I saw that you have these really progressive policies, like what's the utilization rate of these? How does it actually show up in the day-to-day work? How is it being utilized? How are you promoting it on your teams? Great point.
Are there any other questions, Luke, through the chat or that we've missed?
I did not see any, but if anyone has any last minute questions to throw into the Q&A, please feel free to do so.
I figured I'd ask one for myself too. In terms of changing those policies or kind of starting that sort of thought process, if I were to do that within my own company, how would you guide me to
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think it's a great point. So ERGs are a great way, to get connected with any of the employee resource groups, because I think the most important thing is to bring collective feedback to the leadership of an organization. So particularly around paid leave, there's some templates out there. Like I already promoted Paid Leave US, the great nonprofit. They have some kind of templates on their website that actually, can help you send a letter and think through like what would be the gold standard of leave. So when we think about that, it's something that's equal and accessible, and really allows everyone in the organization to utilize it. So I think you have to have kind of a little bit of a consensus, right? And then I think it gets to getting an executive sponsor, somebody that, agrees with you and can help influence and create those paths to have those conversations. It is being done, right? We saw this done at Lyft. We saw it done at Workday. We saw it done at, I think it was actually the New York Times, right? Like, so employees are the ones advocating for these benefits and advocating for their needs. And so I think that it's really true that it's possible. But I think doing it with collective and having kind of, the power of many becomes really important.
Got it. Thank you. That's super helpful.
Yeah.
So there was one more question that came through the chat from Genevieve. And she would just love to hear about your story, Mary Beth, and what took you to your current focus on this career path and this important topic.
Yeah, sure. So I had a baby. That's what happened. So like I said, I was in the financial industry for a long time, and really expected to stay there. I absolutely did, and I went out on leave with my first child, and I came back, and my team. It wasn't really the organization. I worked for an organization that has all the right policies, or at least does today. That they weren't all in place 5 years ago, but has all the right policies, is definitely one of those best places to work. But I think what I found is that it's so about your leader, your team, right? And my executive had his second child very soon after I came back from leave. It didn't even tell us, didn't even share that he didn't even take any time off, right? Like it was just, this didn't even happen. I also worked on a team of all men. And I remember kind of looking for support and asking other women, more senior women. And at that point, the answers I was getting was either that those women had taken time off and had come back into the workforce, Or the other information I was getting was just to kind of power through, put your head down, and you'll figure it out, and eventually it'll get better. And for me, I was like, this just seems like there's an opportunity for us to really be finding ways to provide more tactical support, and to really be promoting environments that are conducive to promoting life outside of work. I also worked on a team where we worked all weekends and very late nights and all the things, which you don't want to do as a new mom all the time. So I think that really was, to me, that feeling like I had ran right into the maternal wall, so to speak, and that there was nobody that really understood what I was going through, and really pushed me into this space. And so I started by working directly with, first I started by doing a lot of reading and a lot of research, and doing some of my own training as well in kind of more of the leadership development and coaching space, and then ultimately worked with men and women directly for a couple of years, really making sure that it wasn't just my experience, right? That this was more of a known problem. And what we have realized over the last few years, and what we've really built with Work 360, is more focusing on that leadership gap, right? On that kind of mid-level manager, and recognizing that it's so much more about providing them with the tools to be the modern leader that they need to be, to support employees that are coming up the ranks today and that are very different, and creating work cultures that adapt to the needs of employees today. And so that's what we've focused on, is really, kind of creating those cultures that care, really looking at, 360-degree flexibility and 360-degree leadership, and, creating that opportunity where you can have these more open and honest conversations and get the support that you need. That's my story. I also have another kid in the middle of all of that. So I got 2 girls, and they're 5 and 3, and it's crazy, especially in COVID.
That's great. Awesome. Thank you. Sorry, Jody. There's another question in the Q&A. I'll let you take it away.
Sure. This question's from Jade, and it ties into a little bit of what you're saying in terms of would it be detrimental or useful then for folks who are potentially starting a family, but then they could choose to stagnate their growth and slow their promotions at work by not taking additional work or extra projects, so that they could have a better work-life balance? Would you say that's detrimental or useful?
So I think it really comes down to your own personal priorities, right? And where you are thinking about your career. I think it's important to stay in. Like, it's very hard if you actually completely opt out. So even if you scale back a little bit, or you just slow down, or maybe you don't take that additional project right away, it's easier to rev up if you're already there. It's harder to get back in, right? And even financially, we the gaps, right? Like, if you take a 5-year career break, it's not just your salary lost, it's your career trajectory, it's your salary, it's your benefits, it's your 401k match, it's everything else, right? So I always encourage people, especially when things are tight and you're looking at the insane amount of childcare, that you never really put your current salary against the cost of care. And you should never be putting just one person's salary. If you're part of a dual career couple, you should be looking at the total income of the family against that care cost. So I think that's really important. I think, look, career ladders today are already pretty much blown up, right? It's more of these crazy winding paths, and you're gonna, maybe you're at one of the big 4 management consulting firms, and then you're at a startup, and then you're at them all around. So I think there is opportunity when you have things big going on in your personal life to say, like, hey, I'm gonna just kind of coast for a little bit. And I don't think that that's ultimately detrimental to your career goals, if that is what's right for you in the moment. And I always say that you can make a decision today based on the information that you have today, and you can make a different decision tomorrow based on that information and what you want at that point. But I do think, if you have an opportunity that's kind of right in front of you, and it's something that you've always wanted, then think about, what do I need, and what is the support that I would have to be able to do this? And If there's a great opportunity career-wise and it means you need more support at home, like ask for that support, whether that's from your partner or whether that's from your employer, right? Maybe it's about having increased flexibility or not traveling when we have the day when we can get back on planes, right? Like things like that, right? You can kind of ask for those additional support so that you can take the role and still go after your personal goals and be the parent that you want to be too.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that was awesome. Thank you both. And I think with that, we're coming close to time, so we'll wrap up. And I thought it might be useful for me to restate a couple of the takeaways I gleaned from this conversation, which are: before joining a company, talk to people and understand if that taking the leave that they promote will really be supported, and incentivize your employees to really take that leave when you're managing people. Have those conversations with your employer and your employees about schedules, boundaries, and expectations, and also with your partner. And then also lead by example. Send delay on an email as one example to not put pressure on your team to work late nights, and normalize taking your kids to the doctor. So I found that super insightful. Mary Beth and Jody, thank you so much. And if anyone has follow-up questions, you can feel free to reach out to us, generally through Manbassadors or EGAL or Work 360. Thank you for joining, everyone. Have a good day.